The work has already been done at the factory. Special tools and lift trucks or cranes will not be required to complete the assembly. This video is not intended as a replacement for the instruction manuals that are included with the equipment. Be sure to read, understand, and observe all the safety precautions and instructions before attempting to use this equipment. The Migmaster 300i package comes in 2 boxes. The large box contains the power source wire feeder console, primary power receptacle, the rear wheel kit, and a lifting lever. The smaller box contains the MIG torch, regulator flow meter, drive roll for 023 and 030 inch diameter wire, work cable clamp assembly, welding handbooks, and the coupon for a free spool of welding wire. Before unpacking the system, check for signs of shipping damage. Contact the transportation company immediately if you notice any. Let's start with the larger box. Lift the cardboard box off the console and remove the packing materials. Set aside the rear wheel kit box and the lifting lever. Now, open the wheel kit box and begin assembling the rear axle and wheels. Once the rear wheels are installed, use the wood lifting lever to lift the rear of the power source off the floor. Remove the shipping cushions by spinning them in a clockwise direction. Now move to the front of the power source. Cut and remove the tape that holds the front wheels against the blue shipping cushions, and then use the lifting lever to raise the front of the power source. Again, rotate the blue cushions in a clockwise direction to remove. The chain will be used later to secure a cylinder of shielding gas in the rear cylinder rack. Now open the other box and remove the MT200 welding torch. The torch is ready to be installed. Line up the pins and fittings on the rear of the torch connector with the connector located on the front of the power source. Insert the torch connector into the power source connector and then tighten the threaded collar. Next, install a spool of welding wire on the spindle inside the wire compartment. Install the spool so that the wire will feed off the bottom of the spool. Caution! Be sure to wear safety glasses with side shields when working around welding equipment and welding or welding-related activities. Take care not to let go of the end of the wire until it is placed securely into the wire drive inlet. The sharp end of the wire can cause serious injury if the spool begins to uncoil. Also, be careful not to let the clipped end of the wire fly free. Disengage the pressure adjusting assembly and then remove the end of the wire from the spool. Straighten the first 6 inches of wire and cut the end to a sharp point. Be sure to remove any burrs from the wire. Now, carefully feed the wire into the drive assembly inlet guide, across the drive roll, and into the torch. Continue feeding about 6 inches of wire into the torch. Next, engage the pressure roll assembly and set the adjusting screw to 4 on the calibrated scale. You're now ready to apply power. With the unit plugged in, turn the power on-off switch found on the rear panel to the on position. Use the wire inch switch located inside the wire compartment to feed the wire through the torch. Accessories such as drive roll, liner, and contact tip for feeding 0.35-inch diameter hard wire were installed at the factory. Refer to the instruction manuals that were supplied with the package for details on converting to other sizes and types of wires. The next thing to be done is to attach the work cable and clamp. On the lower right front corner of the power source, you will notice a short cable labeled electrode and two female connectors. One connector is marked plus for positive and the other is marked minus for negative. MIG welding is usually set up with the electrode or wire as positive and the work cable as negative. Attach the short cable into the positive connector and then plug the work cable into the negative connector. Set a cylinder of shielding gas on the rack located at the back of the power source. Be sure to secure it in place with the supply chain. Also, be sure to follow all recommended safe practices for handling high-pressure cylinders and gases. Now, attach the regulator flow meter to the cylinder. And then attach the gas hose to the flow meter. Once the fittings are tight, open the cylinder valve. You can set the gas flow rate by pressing the purge switch located inside the wire compartment while adjusting the gas control valve. We're using an argon-based shielding gas for MIG welding. The recommended flow rate for MIG is 35 cubic feet per hour, so use the argon side of the flow tube and adjust the valve until the top of the ball in the flow tube is at the 35 mark. Setup of the Migmaster 300i is now complete and you are ready to weld. Section 4. How to use the guided setup. This section will provide a quick review of the guided setup for MIG welding. We'll also review how to set up for TIG and stick welding. Using the guided setup will let you take full advantage of all the welding conditions that have been preset into the Migmaster 300i. The guided setup is as simple as answering 4 basic questions. 1. What wire type are you going to use? 2. What wire size will you use? 3. What is your shielding gas? And 4. What plate thickness will you be welding? All the welding parameters are set automatically by the Migmaster 300i based on your answers. We will begin with an example. Let's say we want to MIG weld with mild steel wire with an 0.35-inch diameter. We'll use a shielding gas mixture of 90% argon plus 8% CO2 plus 2% oxygen. This mixture is used for both MIG short arc and spray arc. We also want to weld on 12-gauge plate. Start by turning the power on. The control panel display screen will show the model name on the first line and the version number on the bottom line. Push the center scroll button once. Notice that the display changed. The top line now gives you an instruction. SEL is an abbreviation for select. The instruction on the top line is select setup type. You can choose guided setup, which is what we want to do, or you can change to manual setup. We'll cover manual setup later in the video, so leave the display on guided setup and press the center scroll button. The top line now asks you to select the wire type. The bottom line will display all your choices one at a time. Use the arrow button to move through the selection choices. You can choose mild steel, stainless steel, 4000 series aluminum, 5000 series aluminum, gas-shielded cord wire, gasless cord wire, or metal cord wire. Our example is mild steel, so use the left arrow button to return the bottom line to mild steel. Now use the center scroll button to move on. Now we need to select the wire size. Use the arrow buttons to move through your choices. The wire size choices will depend on what wire type was selected. For mild steel, you can select 023, 030, 035, or 045. For aluminum, you can choose 035 or 3/64. For cord wires, you can choose up to 5/64 inch diameter. For our example, we need 035 inch. Push the scroll button when 035 is displayed. Next, we'll select the shielding gas. The shielding gas choice also depends on the wire type selected. 100% CO2 can be used for short arc welding of mild steel, or it can be used with cord wire. 75% argon plus 25% CO2, also known as C25, is another mild steel short arc gas, and it can also be used with cord wire. Select 90 argon plus 8 CO2 plus 2 oxygen if you have a gas suitable for spring arc welding of mild steel. Also choose this mixture if you are using one of the argon-based mixtures that are marketed as a combination short arc and spray arc gas. The last selection needed is to choose the plate size. Depending on the wire size that you previously selected, you can choose from 22 gauge up to 3/8 inch plate. You can weld on plate heavier than 3/8 inch, but the welding conditions will remain the same. For our example, we need a 12 gauge plate, so use the arrow button to move to 12 gauge. All that is now left to do is pick up the torch and weld. Let's review the setup for our example. Push the center scroll button 2 times to display the select wire type choices. Select mild steel. Press the scroll button to move to the next display. In the select wire size display, use the arrow buttons to select 035 inch diameter. Now press the scroll button to display the select shielding gas choices. Select 90% argon plus 8% CO2 plus 2% oxygen. Push the scroll button once more to display the plate size choices and select 12 gauge. Now, pick up the torch and weld. While welding, the display will show actual welding current and arc voltage on the top line of the display, and either preset voltage or wire feed speed on the bottom line. When you stop welding, the system stores your actual conditions and displays them on the control panel. You can easily fine-tune the conditions by trimming wire feed speed or arc voltage while welding, or after you stop. You can trim the arc from the front control panel or from an optional foot control or hand control. As an example, we will show trimming voltage. The bottom line of the display is showing current voltage, so use the arrow button to raise or lower the voltage settings. The display will also show you how far above or below you are from the factory settings. To trim the wire feed speed, simply push the scroll button once to display Trim Wire Feed. Each Migmaster 300i was weld tested with 035 inch diameter mild steel wire, a 75% argon plus 25% CO2 shielding gas mixture on 14 gauge plate before it left the factory. And factory test conditions are permanently stored in the memory. You can reset the Migmaster 300i to the factory settings first by turning the power off. Now, press both the center scroll button and the left arrow button. While pressing both buttons, turn the power switch back to the on position. This returns the settings to the original factory test conditions. Next, we'll cover TIG welding. Let's start by installing the HeliArc torch. We're going to use an HW17 torch with built-in valve so that we can leave the MIG torch connected. First, disconnect the short cable labeled electrode and the work cable. DC TIG is almost always set up with the torch negative and the work cable as positive. Plug the torch into the connector marked negative. Plug the work cable into the connector marked positive. Next, plug in the remote contactor switch. Once the torch and remote switch are properly connected, change the process selector switch to the TIG position. Then, turn the power on and use the arrow buttons to set the weld current on the control panel. Be sure to set a current that is appropriate for the tungsten electrode size. We're using a gas valve torch, so there is no need to set gas pre-flow or post-flow. Now you are ready to start welding. The Migmaster 300i uses a special low-current starting circuit that makes it possible to get quick, clean starts without the use of high frequency. You can start the arc using a touch start method or a lift arc method. We'll review both starting procedures. The touch start or rock and roll starting method is a convenient way of starting the arc and still maintaining stable control of the torch. Start by setting the edge of the cup on the plate. Now lower your welding helmet and push the torch switch. After a momentary delay, rock the torch over until the electrode touches the plate. When you are ready, just roll the torch back until the arc is about 3/16 inch long. The current will automatically begin a gentle upslope as soon as the arc is established. Once the puddle is established, you can begin normal torch travel. Be careful not to dip the electrode into the molten puddle. The lift arc method is also an effective starting technique. This time, start by setting the electrode directly on the plate. Now lower your welding helmet and push the torch switch. After a momentary delay, lift the torch away from the plate until the arc is approximately 3/16 inch long. The current will automatically begin to upslope as soon as the arc is established. Begin normal torch travel after the molten puddle is established. TIG welding current can be trimmed before, during, or after welding on the front panel or remotely from an optional foot control or hand control. Now we'll cover the stick welding setup. First, we will connect the electrode holder. For many stick electrode welding applications, the electrode needs to be positive, so attach the electrode holder to the positive terminal and the work clamp